Amy Freeze is live in our newsroom now with an update. Amy?
Ernie, we've been receiving calls here in the newsroom all morning long, people giving their firsthand accounts, sharing their stories of what they were able to see in New York City as these events unfolded. We'd like to share with you right now some of those accounts, which of course have captured the attention of the entire nation.
Today we've had a national tragedy.
This is just a horrific scene and a horrific moment.
Shortly after 9 a.m. New York time, as employees had started a Tuesday morning, a loud blast shook the World Trade Center. Those driving into the city were shocked. New York City Department of Transportation employee Jennifer Nelson could hardly believe her eyes.
There's this huge gaping hole, and all the traffic northbound just stopped. People were standing there with their mouths open. There was paper and glass flying all out of the building. They diverted everybody off. I didn't see the second plane hit, but I felt it. I was standing on the street corner on the payphone, and the ground shook.
Nelson was able to make it into work and watched from her office window as the famed New York City skyline dropped in a cloud of smoke right before her eyes.
And now from my office, I could see where the trade centers were. There's just piles of smoke. It's actually lessening from what it was, but I watched both towers come down. It almost looked like there were it was exploding from within, but they just collapsed.
Another eyewitness, Stanley Davenport. He works just 7 blocks from the Trade Center. He first heard the blast, then fled to the streets with his coworkers.
I walked home. I was kind of afraid to get in the subway. Maybe it wouldn't be running anyway. So I walked home, and I had walked maybe 15 blocks, and I was talking to some people I knew, and I heard people scream, and I turned around and watched the first tower go down. Let me say this, before that, after I was outside the second time, after the second, I don't know exactly now, the first or second explosion, I saw people jumping off the building.
Stanley and Jennifer both have made it home safely. Now they watch with the rest of America in disbelief as their city sits in chaos. Obviously, the pictures and the words both telling of a frightful morning in New York City. Let's go back right now to the studio, Ernie and Wendy.
All right, Amy Freeze, thank you very much. Not more. Amy Freeze has more on the airline attacks this morning. Amy?
Ernie and Wendy, we have been following very closely which aircraft is perhaps responsible for each of the events that have taken place. We do know that 4 domestic aircraft are involved in the events today. All 4 of the flights were bound for the state of California. American Flight 11, Boston to Los Angeles, crashed into the World Trade Center. 92 people were on board. American Flight 77, DC to LA, crashed into the World Trade Center. 64 on board. United Airlines Flight 93, Newark to San Francisco, crashed southeast of Pittsburgh, 45 on board. United Flight 175, Boston to Los Angeles, crashed in an undisclosed location, 65 on board. We think that all 4 of these aircraft have been reported as hijacked by United and American Airlines. Also, a 5th was assumed to have gone into Camp David, a 5th aircraft that has not been confirmed as of this morning. So we continue to keep you up to date, and Ernie and Wendy have some numbers that they will give you if you need to call on any of these flights or are concerned about any aircraft that you may have to go on or someone else that you know may have been traveling on, and we will give you those numbers. Amy Freeze, live in the News Center, WB2 News.
All right, Amy, thank you very much.
In the Pittsburgh area, they're looking into what happened with a plane crash there. Again, it looked like possibly somebody from the Denver area could have been the pilot of that plane. And our Amy Freeze is joining us now from the newsroom with the latest on that story. Amy?
Jeff, that's exactly right. The pilot of that flight, which was Pittsburgh United Airlines Flight 93, did have a pilot from Colorado, and he could very well be a hero because we think that that airplane was actually headed for another target, did not make it, crashing in Pittsburgh. 43-year-old Jason Dahl was scheduled to be piloting United Airlines Flight 93. We know that he was on board. He is from Ken Carl. It's a neighborhood in Jefferson County. It's a gated community. A sheriff's deputy has been making sure that the family does have its privacy. Dahl leaves behind a wife and 2 sons. Neighbors are lending them support, as you might imagine, in this time of grief.
As a King Carl Ranch resident, I would just like to say my family, and I'm sure everyone who lives out here, our hearts go out to the family of that pilot. Our hearts and thoughts are with you.
Our hearts and our thoughts are with many of the victims. We're starting to get some of the names of people who are aboard those hijacked planes. First of all, a TV commentator who was married to the Bush administration's top lawyer, the talent scout for the LA Kings hockey team, and the executive producer of the TV show Frasier, and also a movie actress. Here are some photos. Barbara Olson, she's a TV commentator. She's the wife of U.S. Solicitor General Theodore Olson. She was aboard American flight from the Dulles airport that crashed into the Pentagon. David Angel was executive producer of the NBC television show Frasier. He was flying on American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston to Los Angeles with his wife Lynn. Barry Bernenson was an actress and photographer who appeared in such movies as Cat People, Winter Kills, and Remember My Name. She was the widow actor of Anthony Perkins. She was on American's Flight 11. Garnett Ace Bailey was director of pro scouting for the Los Angeles hockey team. He was aboard United Airlines Flight 175. Also, we are getting new information on sporting events that are going to be canceled, among them the Major League Baseball games for today. Also out of Hollywood, the Emmys and the Latin Grammys have both been canceled. All of the movie studios have been emptied in Hollywood. Nearly the entire entertainment industry has been shut down due to the tragic events in New York and Washington, D.C. This morning, as we continue with the breaking news headlines and keeping you up to date on information, we are, of course, deterring from our normal weather and traffic on the twos situation. But we do want to give you the information so that if you're headed out the door, if you do have to go into work, here is the information that you will need. First, a look at the current conditions. 58 degrees right now, 62 here at the Denver Tech Center. Southwest winds are light, the barometer steady. The fastcast for this day, we will have a warm afternoon once again. Temperatures making it into the middle 80s. We'll look for 84 here in Denver. Overnight lows in the upper 70s. As far as traffic goes, we have not had reports of any major delays. You take your typical drive times and be careful as you head into work this morning. That's the update from the newsroom. Now back to Jeff and Laura in the studio.
What we have done is invited a guest, and Amy Freeze is with him, to explain a little bit about the mindset involved here.
Jeff and Laura, you guys pointed it out. We don't know who the terrorists are at this point, but there has raised concerns here in our own community for the Arab Americans and the Muslims. We've invited a spokesperson for that community here with us this morning. I'd like to introduce you to Wadi Muhazin. Welcome this morning, first of all.
Thank you very much.
What is the reaction of your community, the Arab Americans and Muslims living here along the Front Range?
Well, like every American that witnessed yesterday's horrific events on the television set, we were saddened and shocked, and we're hurting like every other American's hurting right now.
However, you've got to be aware that a lot of people are worried about terrorism, and seeing Arab Americans, Muslims living in their community, they're going to look to you and maybe raise an eyebrow. What is the reaction to that?
Absolutely. Unfortunately, our community, the Arab American community and the Muslim community, have suffered from extreme stereotypes in the media and Hollywood, and with various extremist groups that would engage in terrorism or violence in the name of Islam, for example, which, by the way, is a very peaceful religion in its teachings. And the actions taken yesterday by whoever did this, whether they be Arabs, Muslims, or not, and I think we are jumping the gun in making that a foregone conclusion, are completely opposed to Islamic teachings, for example.
And also, this isn't the first time you say jumping the gun, but you look to Oklahoma City bombing, Flight 800, even to the World Trade Center bombing in 1993. And you've been in this position before where the Arab American community, the Muslims, have to react in sort of a defensive mode.
Absolutely, and that's unfortunate. And taking your example of the Oklahoma City bombing situation, the assumption was made right off the bat that an Arab or a Muslim was involved. And Arab Americans were detained on highways and in airports, contrary to their constitutional rights. And that saddens and hurts us because we're also Americans, we're Americans first. Our loyalties are to the United States. Most of us were born here. Many of us are second, third generation Americans, like most Americans. We have an affinity for our ethnic background. However, our loyalty comes first, and it hurts when we're singled out because of our background.
Speaking on the behalf of the Arab American and Muslim community, we feel that your heart is in the right place, but common sense tells you and your community that you really do have to take some precautions. I know that the mosque has been closed down.
The mosque has been closed down. It was closed down yesterday because of threats made. Ironically, bombing threats and that sort of thing. Furthermore, whenever these incidents have happened in the past, like the Oklahoma City thing that you mentioned, Flight 800 hijacking and crashing, which also was not conducted by an Arab or a Middle Eastern person, Arab Americans have been harassed, they've been beaten, and that sort of thing has happened even here at the Auraria campus, for example, during those incidents.
A final question for you, for folks living in the community, Arab Americans, Muslims, and also people who are not of Middle Eastern descent but are trying to deal with this circumstance. What advice do you give, what words of wisdom that we can all get along and perhaps understand each other a little more?
Well, it's a very emotional time. There's a lot of heated passions. And just like the individuals who carried out this operation, if you will, were clearly mad and extreme, there's going to be a few extreme people that turn on our community as well, unjustifiably so. So people of Arab American or Islamic descent need to be cautious at this time, unfortunately. But I would also urge non-Arabs and non-Muslim and our fellow Coloradans to exercise tolerance and to understand that there's a few people that are being shown on television, for example, cheering on what had happened in the Middle East. And it's important to point out that the overwhelming majority of Muslims and Arabs in the world have condemned this action. And while we see a few teenagers in a refugee camp cheering on what happened, what the media is not showing are the widespread candlelight vigils that are occurring in the Palestinian territories, for example.
Thank you for your words this morning. Thank you for being with us. Wadi Muhazin is the spokesperson for the Muslim American community, and we wish you the best in the coming days as we all start to deal with the sadness and the anger that we are feeling. Thank you for being with us. Jeff and Laura, as you can tell, you know, communities are really going to have to come together under these circumstances, even for us right here along the Front Range.
And again, this is something that has been going on for over 26 hours now after the tragedy. Amy Freeze, take it away.
Jeff and Laura, we're joined once again by another guest. We have been following all morning long the developing facts, but also looking at this situation as it's going to play out in history books is quite frightening. You look back over the years at the different events that have taken place. Of course, the 1983 bombing of a U.S. Marine barracks in Lebanon, Beirut, Lebanon. In 1993, the bomb exploded in the basement of the World Trade Center that killed 6 people. In 1995, the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City destroyed by a bomb, 168 people dying. 2 U.S. embassies in Africa were destroyed in 1998 by bombs, killing 224 people. Last year, 17 U.S. servicemen killed when the USS Cole was hit by a bomb while they were in Yemen. So joining us now, we welcome Richard Moeller, a local professor of political science at Metro State. Welcome this morning. Really, the largest comparison that we have seen is Pearl Harbor to this. Is it even comparable?
Well, in some ways it is. Probably one of the better comparisons that can be made is, in fact, the War of 1812, when the British were still fighting with us, when we were still fighting for independence. And they attacked Washington, D.C. and actually leveled the city and burned it to the ground. However, though, when I was doing research last night and finding out how many deaths were involved, in fact, it was only 54 deaths associated with it. So, indeed, and tragically, this is probably the worst attack on America in its history.
Once we get into the hundreds, people go to Oklahoma City. They also go to Pearl Harbor. Why is this particularly not really comparable to Pearl Harbor? My first thought was, well, definitely Pearl Harbor was military, at least.
Right. At least with Pearl Harbor, we knew who our enemy was. You know, people chose sides during that time, that you knew who your friends were, you knew who your enemies were. Right now, we don't really know for sure who's responsible, although the FBI this morning seems to be narrowing in quite a bit on Osama bin Laden. But we're not positive. But, you know, during an attack from Pearl Harbor by the Japanese, we knew that was them. They had their planes with markings on that. But today, it's not traditional, and attacks aren't traditional.
Well, it's faceless terrorism, and
Right.
it is so frustrating. For those of us who don't follow on a historical basis terrorism, what really has happened to the policy and